Welcome back to the Lit Show. It's time for my triumphant return. As always, I am your host, Jeremy Fee, and I am happy to have you here at the Lit Show. I need to give you my best read of 2023, and to figure that out, I'm going to have a book battle with all of my best reads. I have been building up to a best read of the decade, declaring a best read of the year 2020, 2021, 2022, and we need a winner for 2023 to add to that list. To do that, of course, I go through each month and have a book battle determining the best read of the month. For 2023, I added in the genre wars concept, in which I've been adding up which genre wins each month. I do my best to try to read about 2 books a month from each of the different major genre categories. So here we are. I owe you my reading wrap-ups for October, November, and December, but I'm just gonna roll those in with this video. Let's start out with January through September, talking about which books won for those months. And when we get to October, November, and December, I will do a book battle for at least the final 4 of each month with a bit of an overview so that you get some discussion about what I read for the month. I'm excited to give you this best read of 2023, so let's get right to it. In January, I had a wonderful reading month. It was a great start for the year. The book that stood out the most and won my best read of the month back in January was Dog Meat by Priscilla Bettis. Priscilla Bettis is a member of the online YouTube BookTube community, but does not actually have a YouTube channel at this time with videos on it and that sort of thing, but rather tends to come into the community, watch people's videos, leave comments behind, read the books by BookTubers, review them. She's a wonderful member of the community, and I was so glad to read this book. She's also got great short stories. The Hay Bell really stood out to me as a shocking story, and this book was very psychological. This felt like literary fiction, dystopian literary fiction, so you might call it psychological horror, but I really enjoyed it. If you are willing to stomach some gross, disgusting stuff, then you might really like the book. February was also a great reading month. February being the month of Valentine's, you would think that I would have found something romantic for my best read, but no. It ended up being science fiction. Hyperion by Dan Simmons. Really great classic science fiction. Dan Simmons took the sort of formula setup from the Canterbury Tales and gives you the story of travelers, different people out on a pilgrimage through space. This is the story that gives us the creature, the Shrike. Highly recommend it if you like classic science fiction. In March, the month of St. Patrick's Day, I did have some luck with finding some good books. That month, the book that came out on top was by Philip Chase. The first book by Philip Chase, The Way of Edan, which back then I was mispronouncing as The Way of Edon. Silly me. It's wonderful fantasy, feels like a mix of classic fantasy with modern fantasy elements. A great way to start a trilogy, though some people might say that it felt like 1.5 to 2 books mixed into one. Well worth the read, well worth the time. Fascinating characters and a great setup for the trilogy overall. In April, it was springtime. I was enjoying the weather. I was still getting a lot of reading done. I read something that was worthy of a spooky season October read. The book that won for the month was by Stephen King. It's called 1922. I picked the book up because it was thin. It's one of Stephen King's shorter works, and I like it when I can pick up a quick read like that when I've got a busy month going on. It's a book that is probably going to stay with me for many, many years. In May, I ended up with not a tie, but a decision to not only pick a winner for the month, but go ahead and use my first wild card spot, because the book that lost in the preliminary round of the book battle that month, I felt deserved some attention. So the book that won for the month was The Sympathizer by Viet Thanh Nguyen, a major award winner book, extremely well written, very psychological. It is fiction, but it feels very real, dealing with what it would be like to be torn between two different sides in a social civil war. The book that got the wild card spot #1 for the year, the book that lost to the sympathizer in prelims, is a joke book. It's a book full of puns and references to goth culture. It's called Oh My Goth, Jokes for When You Feel Dead Inside. And it made me smile and laugh a whole lot. Then we had the month of June. For June, July, and August, I declared a tie each month and used the rest of my wildcard spots for the year, which meant I wasn't going to have any more wildcard spots after August, but oh well. That's how good my reading was for the summer, June, July, and August. In June, the tie that I declared was A Drowned Kingdom by P.L. Stuart, which I apologize. At the time I was calling The Drowned Kingdom, not A Drowned Kingdom, because the book is called A Drowned Kingdom, but it's book 1 in the Drowned Kingdom saga. P.L. Stuart created one of the best fantasy books I've read in a really long time by giving such a fun, interesting, devious main character who is a really awful, horrible person that yet you're still rooting for. At least I was in reading it. So it's also a fascinating book dealing with the idea of the Kingdom of Atlantis, and I love that mythology and the kind of conspiracy theory research that goes into what happened to Atlantis. The tie for that month went for my wildcard spot #2, which is Stoner by John Williams. I had to read this book after Johanna recommended it over on her BookTube channel and just praised it as one of the best books she ever read, and I believe she's right. It really was a powerful, emotional book just about a guy who, in a realistic sense, doesn't necessarily understand all the norms of social culture and goes out into the world and ends up becoming an English professor. So you deal with his emotional pitfalls and the bleakness of his life over the years. It's interesting. I know that probably makes it sound like a sad, horrible book, but it's very interesting. I recommend it. That brings us to the month of July. Continuing the great reading throughout the summer, enjoying all the books at that time. The books that came out on top, winning a tie for July, the second book in Philip Chase's series, The Prophet of Edan. In this book, Philip Chase did much of what you would do in book 3 in a trilogy. He was able to get most of the trilogy, the traditional trilogy plot setup, into 2 books. Great character development. This one is full of combat, battle, strategies, fascinating psychology of the characters, picking which side they're on and whether or not they're going to betray people or change sides or join another faction or side, and a really interesting fantasy. Great to read that book. It tied with my wildcard #3 spot, Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia. She's one of my favorite authors. She writes wonderful characters, often in a gothic setting or a magical realism setting. She's very good with her historical research to where it feels very real, and she's very good with creating characters who are criminals and yet interesting. That brings us to August, which closes out the summer of awesome reading. For August, the tie win went once again to P.L. Stuart. I read book 2 and 3 of the Drowned Kingdom saga that month, gave the win to book 3. This is supposed to be a 7-book series. In 2024, we should see book 4 come out. And P.L. Stuart is going at a good pace with the plan of just giving us 1 novel each year, and it's working out great. It tied with my wildcard spot #4, Yellow Face by R.F. Kuang. She's written a lot of fantasy now. She's well known for her fantasy novels, but this is realistic fiction, literary fiction really, and addresses racism and cultural issues in our society today so much that the book itself was hugely controversial when it came out. A lot of reviewers took issue with it in different ways. It's that powerful with its writing. This book also won for 2023 Goodreads Best Fiction Novel. And I think that says a lot to have that many people vote on Goodreads for this to be the best fiction novel of the year. After August, that takes us to September. September is another month of good reading, In this month, I was able to read the third book by Philip Chase, The Return to Edan, where you can tell just from the way the title is phrased, things are going to be a little bit different. So most of the traditional trilogy setup was taken care of in books 1 and 2, and Philip Chase was able to experiment and give us something different for a book 3 in a trilogy than what you would normally expect. It is still fulfilling the idea of the hero's journey, it's just doing it in a way that a lot of modern authors, writers today, don't do. It's giving us a lot more character development. This book got very psychological, very philosophical, and for long-time viewers of the channel, I love that in my literature. I love when authors can bring in those philosophical ideas and really make me think as a reader. All right, that gets us caught up. We now need to hear about October, November, and December, and then do the battle to declare the best read of 2023. Just an overview of October. It was spooky season, so I did my best to mix in Halloween theme, horror theme, or psychological fear sort of works in the different categories, which is how we end up with Shirley Jackson's We've Always Lived in the Castle. It was also a weird month because I found out that there was a novelization for My Cousin Vinny, and then that author continued it as a series with more books. So I did end up reading those My Cousin Vinny books, which I don't necessarily recommend. I mean, with My Cousin Vinny, you can just watch the movie and enjoy it. The book is not better than the film. It was also a weird month because Slayers came out, which was an Audible exclusive for continuing the lives of the characters from the Buffy, the Vampire Slayer universe. Really fascinating here. Really, Spike is the main character, and they bring in a multiverse aspect to where you have a Cordelia from another reality, where basically Cordelia is the Slayer instead of Buffy, and she needs help. So it's a fun story in the sense of Audible got the actual actors from the TV series back, and they were able to record the story. It was fun. It was a nostalgia play, but I enjoyed it. I also read a lot of short stories and some books by BookTube, AuthorTube people. Cameron Chaney's book, Autumn Crow High, Fresh Hell. That was a lot of fun. Great for a Halloween spooky season read. And I want to thank NetGalley for giving me what was then an advanced free reading copy, an ebook, for the Martha Wells book, Systems Collapse, which is the latest book in the Murderbot series. I love that series. Murderbot is a lot of fun. Let's go ahead and look at the final four for the month. The first book in our final four, we've got Shirley Jackson's psychological thriller, We Have Always Lived in the Castle. I love Shirley Jackson's work. She is viewed as the classic master of psychological thriller. This book definitely belongs here, and I highly recommend in your future October spooky season reading, read Shirley Jackson's works, whether it's her short stories or longer works. Our second book that makes it into the semifinals round, our final four, is a book by Bret Easton Ellis. He is viewed as probably the postmodern master of psychological horror. This book is called The Shards, but he is also the author of American Psycho, which was turned into a very popular film, and thus where he gets that cred. In this book, there's a serial killer in Los Angeles, and it is fiction, but it's written as if it was Bret Easton Ellis when he was a teenager. So it feels very real and makes you question the blur, in that postmodern sense, the blur of reality between what really is fiction and what isn't fiction, as he includes parts of his own real life and inspirations for his other books, which was part of what made it fascinating to read. The third book that makes it into our final four is the Murderbot book, Systems Collapse by Martha Wells. I love this character, the Murderbot, as a stand-in for people who are awkward, maybe introverts, and have difficulty interacting with other people, but you've seen relationships develop over the course of the series with Murderbot and the various, I'll say, people and robots and AI and such that he interacts with. Then we've got our fourth book in the series, which is from R. St. Clair, Regina, here from BookTube and HorrorTube, one of the pillars of our online AuthorTube community. R. St. Clair wrote Fashion Victims, I want to say a couple of years ago. It is a fun read. It brings in pop culture elements, but like a lot of those Bret Easton Ellis books, you've got a serial killer, murder mystery stuff going on, so a lot of fun to read. For these four books, let's do the competition. The first battle for semifinals semifinals is going to be Shirley Jackson's book up against Bret Easton Ellis's book, and that is fitting with the classic psychological horror up against the postmodern psychological horror. And me being a bit of a postmodernist myself, I know I'm biased, but I'm going to give the win to Bret Easton Ellis here. The Shards is a book that is an acquired taste. I don't think everybody would like it, but if you enjoy that blur of, and I can't tell you the ending, I'm not going to give you spoilers, but if you read the book, at the end, you may end up like me going, why would the author write the ending in that way? Why would the author leave those questions and that situation there at the end? Happy to talk to you about it if you read the book. Our other semifinals matchup, we've got Martha Wells' book up against R. St. Clair's book. Both of them were a delight to read. They were both a whole lot of fun, but at the end of the day, I'm gonna give the win to R. St. Clair's book, Fashion Victims. And that means we've got a final round in which we've got serial killer, psychological, thriller, murder mystery. Either way, either of these books win. That means for our genre wars for the year, we can go ahead and put a +1, tally up another number in that genre category. Having to make a decision because I am not allowed any more ties, no more wildcard spots. As much as I enjoyed R. St. Clair's book, I'm going to give the win to The Shards. I think at the end of the day, it's the book that years from now, I'm more likely to remember and be even more freaked out by. Though I recommend them both highly, of course. That gives us a winner for October. We can slot that in for our end of the year book battle contest. November was another month with a lot of fun reads, but also some weird reads. November is nonfiction November. It's kind of awkward to have these readathons or read-alongs because I've been doing genre wars this year, and I'm purposely trying to read on average, about 2 books from each major genre category anyway. So of course I read some nonfiction for the month. For the first time in a few years, I did not participate in NaNoWriMo though. Fun reads, though, getting back to Larry McMurtry, one of my all-time favorite authors, as well as getting back to John Gwynne, a fantasy author that I love. This was the month that I found out that Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was a movie that I enjoyed as a kid growing up, was actually inspired by a book. I'm not going to say based on a book because I went ahead and found that as an audiobook, and you can go on to Audible and they have the first 3 books in the series as audiobooks, so I got caught up listening to those. After the first one, I wondered how in the world there would even be a second book, but they kind of hand-waved some things for that to happen. Clearly, after the film was made, the author of the original book wanted some more money, and so wrote some more books for the series, and incorporated elements of the film that were not from the first book into the second and third book. But even after the second book, I wondered, how are they going to have a third book? I went ahead and went through the 3 audio books, but after that, I said no more. I couldn't take any more, because it just wouldn't make sense for me. It didn't make sense for a second book to exist or a third book to exist. Certainly wouldn't make sense to keep writing more of them after that. A lot of fun books this month. Let's look at the final 4. We ended up with, in our first quadrant, the first section of the book battle, we've got Larry McMurtry, All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers. This is part of the Houston series, which builds up to Terms of Endearment. But I love this book. Larry McMurtry is one of the best authors to ever live. The Lonesome Dove Saga will always be in my heart. His writing is amazing. And in this book, he managed to have his emotional roller coasters and great character work in a much shorter book. And I really appreciated that. So All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers. It's a shorter book, not anywhere near as long what you would expect with Larry McMurtry, but very good character work, very realistic, set in modern day for the time. Our second book in the final 4, we've got The Paperboy by Pete Dexter. This is a book that I saw was available as a film for streaming online, and I thought, hold on, let me get the audiobook first. I'll listen to the audiobook, and then I'll watch the movie. A lot of my reading actually here in this month and December was inspired by films that were available online or coming out in the theater. This is a weird story. We've got a lot of different elements that are here, but it's a realistic story with questions about potential social issues and murder, and it's got really good character work, but in the end, builds up to some really unexpected elements. The third book in our final four here is a play. The classic play Inherit the Wind by Jerome Lawrence and Robert E. Lee. This pair I really like as playwrights. They do a great job with their work. They wrote the play The Night Thoreau Spent in Jail. Inherit the Wind is based on real life, on history with a court case, and you get a circus of a trial with powerful emotions and theatrics in the courtroom. Our fourth book in the final four this month is The Black Count. It is about Alexander Dumas' father, General Alexander Dumas Sr., the black general who served Napoleon. And because the film Napoleon was coming out, I wanted to read this book. I also studied Alexander Dumas and his life when I did my undergraduate honors program thesis, which I did over the Three Musketeers, and thus I looked into his life. That was when I found out about his father, who was a general serving Napoleon. Napoleon was supposed to be the godfather of the author Alexander Dumas, who wrote the Three Musketeers and Count of Monte Cristo and all that. But there was something that happened in the relationship between his father, the general, and Napoleon, and that is explored in this biography. This is an award-winning, Pulitzer Prize-winning biography. It is a powerful book. The historical research clearly shows that Alexander Dumas was probably inspired by the conspiracies, political and financial and all that, what happened with his family, probably as real-life inspiration for the Count of Monte Cristo. So if you like the Count of Monte Cristo, you probably will be fascinated by this book. All right, let's go ahead and do the battles. The first pairing, Larry McMurtry's book, All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers, is up against The Paperboy by Pete Dexter. While The Paperboy was an interesting and emotionally powerful story, it's hard to defeat Larry McMurtry. I'm going to give the win to All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers. I just enjoyed it a little bit more. In the other half of semifinals, we've got the nonfiction by Tom Rice, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, The Black Count, which is up against Inherit the Wind, the play by Jerome Lawrence and Robert E. Lee. Both of these are powerful works. Both of them reveal more about history. They are both well worth your time. I'm going to give the win to The Black Count just because I feel like I already knew a lot of what was in Inherit the Wind, whereas I learned a lot of new information from The Black Count. That gives us a finals round that is Larry McMurtry up against some great nonfiction, and it is Nonfiction November, so that is causing me to lean toward giving the win to the nonfiction book. The Black Count, the story of General Alexander Dumas, the real Count of Monte Cristo, as the subtitle of the book says, is our winner. Best read for November 2023. We can go ahead and give a +1 to the nonfiction category for our genre wars, and we can slot this book in for its win for November. And that means we just have to figure out our December winner, and then we are good to have our best read of 2023 book battle. I'll try and do this quickly so we can get to that. December, I feel at sometimes I struggled with the reading, but I had a lot of vacation time. As a teacher, they give me time off from school in December. Got about 2 weeks, which is wonderful. A lot of this I read as audiobooks. For the Ken Follett novel, The Armor of Light, that is continuing the Pillars of the Earth series, the latest release from Ken Follett. I did that as a buddy read with my friend Alan from the BookTube channel, Big Hard Books and Classics, so shout out to Alan for a fun buddy read via Voxer for that one. All right, let's go ahead and get to the final four for December. We have got Terms of Endearment by Larry McMurtry, which beat out Armor of Light and even beat out the Ryan Cahill fantasy, which I know may be controversial to a lot of people, but Terms of Endearment is a true emotional roller coaster ride and a masterpiece by Larry McMurtry. So good, there's a film version of it and everything. Highly recommended. Our second book in the final four for December, we've got Carney by R. St. Clair. It was able to beat out The Best of Richard Matheson, and it was able to beat out Brideshead Revisited, which inspired the film Saltburn, which came out in theaters, which I wanted to have an understanding of this story. Brideshead Revisited is set about 100 years before Saltburn, so it's interesting to see how a story about the early 20th century can influence a story for a film for the early 21st century. But R. St. Clair got the win over those with the book Carney. This is R. St. Clair's most recent release. I bought it on Amazon and had a whole lot of fun with it. The cover is great, and the idea of a killer involved with the carnival. I mean, R. St. Clair knows her genre and really does a masterful job with this one. I highly recommend it. For our third book in the final four, I've got a Star Trek Deep Space Nine book, which I took in as an audiobook, Revenant by Alex White. Alex White has written things for the Alien series, which is why I wanted to check out this book, but also it's got Jadzia Dax and Kira Nerys on the cover, two of my favorite characters from Star Trek and from science fiction. Very good, powerful characters. I recommend it if you're a fan of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And the fourth book that made our final four is a poetry book. I know that's shocking. Poetry almost never makes it up to the final four. This is Blue Yeti by Maggie Nelson. It starts out as a collection of poetry that seems to be by a narrator who's obsessed with the color blue, but then it ends up being about sex and about depression and very deep psychological, philosophical ideas as it continues as a work. I feel like it deserves some attention, and if you think that kind of poetry would interest you, you may want to check it out. Alright, our first battle for December here in semifinals, Terms of Endearment up against Carney by R. St. Clair. As much as I love Larry McMurtry's books, Carney was a lot of fun. R. St. Clair, I thought when she wrote Code Red, like, that really stood out to me, and I went into this wondering, can this be as good as Code Red? Can these characters be as fun as Code Red? And I think she has lived up to that. I know Code Red is a really high standard. I love that previous book by her. But Carney was a fun read. Our other matchup for semifinals, the Star Trek Deep Space Nine book Revenant up against the poetry book. It's a tough comparison, apples and oranges here. As much as I love the nostalgia of going back to the characters from Deep Space Nine, the real emotional gut punch really was in the poetry. Blue Yeti is making it to finals for December. That puts Carney by R. St. Clair up against Blue Yeti by Maggie Nelson in our finals round for December. I'm going to go ahead and give the win to Carney by R. St. Clair and highly recommend, if you like horror books, you should check it out. It can be a little gruesome, but if you're willing to stomach that, then I think that you would enjoy it. That means that Carney is our best read of December 2023, which gives the horror genre another win for the year. We can add another point total for the genre wars, and we can slot this in as our December best read of the month. We now know all of our best reads of the month, which means we may proceed with finding out our best read of 2023. The book battle for the end of the year begins now. In January, Dogmeat by Priscilla Bettis is up against Hyperion by Dan Simmons, the winner from February. As these 2 months' winners collide, I'm giving the win to Dogmeat. As much as I liked the formula and concept behind Hyperion, I found Dogmeat to be much more fascinating. It's moving on in the book battle. Between March and April, The Way of Edan by Philip Chase is a powerful, wonderful work of fantasy. You know what they say, Philip Chase, the best in fantasy. But unfortunately, the king is here. Stephen King with the book 1922, a book that probably has scarred me for life. I've been emotionally scarred from reading that book. 1922 is going to get the win here, despite the fact that it was just emotionally devastating. And if you don't want to be psychologically messed up for a while, don't read that book. It's just that powerful. For our battle between May and June, we've got The Sympathizer by Viet Thanh Nguyen up against A Drowned Kingdom by P.L. Stuart, book 1 of the Drowned Kingdom saga. Here, it's a tough call because The Sympathizer is a powerful, award-winning book, but what P.L. Stuart did was just as shocking as what The Sympathizer did, and I feel that P.L. Stuart deserves awards and praise. A Drowned Kingdom is going to win this matchup. Which brings us to the battle between July and August. We've got The Prophet of Edan by Philip Philip Chase, up against Lord and King, The Drowned Kingdom Saga, book number 3 by P.L. Stuart. Two of my new favorite fantasy authors up against one another. This time, I'm going to give the win to Philip Chase's book, The Prophet of Edan. I really enjoyed the character work and thought that the combat was handled really well, though no deficiencies in P.L. Stewart's book, Lord and King. That brings us to the battle for September and October, Return to Edan by Philip Chase, up against The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis. Both of these books, when you read them, you might think, what is this author doing? They go outside of what you would traditionally expect with plot. They get very psychological. I'm going to give the win to Return to Edan by Philip Chase, the best book in his trilogy by far. For November and December, we've got the nonfiction book, The Black Count, Napoleon's Rival, and the Real Count of Monte Cristo by Tim Rice, up against Carney by R. St. Clair. Both wonderful books, highly recommend them. Having to make a decision in the moment now, I'll say I enjoyed reading Carney just a little bit more than I enjoyed reading the nonfiction books, so Carney's advancing to the next level. Then we get to our wildcard matchups. Wildcard number 1 against wildcard number 2. It's Oh My Goth, Jokes for When You Feel Dead Inside, which I highly recommend. A lot of great puns. Interesting goth culture references in there. Up against Stoner by John Williams. Stoner is such a powerhouse as a work of literature and very fascinating to contemplate. Stoner's getting the win here. Easy win over the pun book, really. Then we've got wildcard spots 3 and 4, and how fascinating is it that both covers have these giant eyes on them, and the look on the eyes. From Silver Nitrate by Silvio Moreno Garcia to Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Of these two books, the one that just meant more to me and that I feel is more powerful, long-standing work of literature, it's Yellowface by R.F. Kuang that's advancing. That takes care of prelims. Let's go ahead and take a look at quarterfinals. We've got Dog Meat by Priscilla Bettis up against 1922 by Stephen King. I feel like from this point out, every decision is going to be extremely difficult. I could possibly say all of these books deserve to be on your TBR, your reading list. So I highly recommend them if you like the genre they are. It's a tough call here. Both of them are psychologically powerful, but I'm going to give the winner to the King. Stephen King's book 1922. You've got to read it. Then we've got A Drowned Kingdom by P.L. Stuart up against The Prophet of Edan by Philip Chase. Oh no, two of my favorite authors who are very powerful as fantasy authors, who both have BookTube YouTube channels actively online discussing books, and it's book 1 from one series up against book 2 of another, which also makes it difficult to compare. Between the two of them, I'm going to give this win to P.L. Stuart with A Drowned Kingdom. It may just help that it was book 1 in the series to give it the win over The Prophet of Edan. Then we've got The Return to Edan by Philip Chase up against Carney by R. St. Clair. Again, two pillars of the BookTube, AuthorTube community, two people that I greatly respect. I enjoyed both of these books. Return to Edan possibly here benefits by being the end of a trilogy and giving us that character development that's unexpected in so many ways for many of the characters. Return to Edan is getting the win. In the last quarterfinals matchup here, we've got Stoner by John Williams up against Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. My goodness, either of these could be the best read of the year. I'm going to give the win to Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, admitting my bias from knowing Rebecca Kuang when she was a teenager doing speech and debate. But I feel like if you wanted to talk about Stoner and whether or not it had some flaws, you could. As powerful and great of a book as it is, it does skip time a lot. There are a lot of jumps where I, as a reader, would have liked to have known more. And that is not the case in Yellowface. All right, we've got now our final four. For the final four, we end up with Stephen King's book 1922, powerful psychological horror. It is about a man who kills his wife. The very beginning of the book, he has decided to murder his wife. He gets his son to help him, and it is the horror of what happens to him and his son and their relationship and all the psychological ramifications of being being a murderer and dealing with that. It is just atrocious. It is shocking. Second book in our final four, we've got A Drowned Kingdom by P.L. Stuart. It's a fantasy novel that deals not only with the fall of the kingdom of Atlantis, but a main character who is a devious, seemingly evil person who is having to change over time. And I know I, as a reader, was rooting for the character to grow and become a better person, but fascinating work of literature. Then we've got Return to Eden by Philip Chase, more fantasy, and the end of a trilogy. Really amazing what Philip Chase achieves here as a non-typical book 3 in a trilogy. And then Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, story of a woman who decides to steal her dead friend's manuscript and rework it and try to publish it as her own, and has to deal with the ramifications from that. So the first pairing that we get, 1922 versus A Drowned Kingdom by P.L. Stuart. Which book did I enjoy reading more? Which book was ultimately more fun to read? The answer is P.L. Stuart's book, the fantasy book, because at the end of the day, 1922 is a book that I want out of my head. I'm glad that I read it, but part of me wishes that I had never read it. Whereas I'm really delighted to be reading P.L. Stuart's series. So it's advancing to finals for the year. Then we've got Return to Eden by Philip Chase up against Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Either of these really could be advancing to finals. I think Philip Chase's book is once again benefiting by being the end of a series or trilogy where the characters have had a chance to develop over the course of that trilogy. It's advancing to finals. So in the end, we once again have P.L. Stuart up against Philip Chase, and that means no matter what, our winner for the year will be a yearly genre win for fantasy. So we can go ahead and put 2023 down as a fantasy win for Genre Wars. All right, declaring the winner for the year. It's a tough call. Either of them would be a magnificent best read of the year, but I'm giving it to P.L. Stuart's book, A Drowned Kingdom. Great way to start out the series. Really powerful psychological character work. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Hope you've enjoyed the book battle. I'd love to get your comments down below with your thoughts. What was your best read of the year? If you were making these decisions instead of me, how might you have made them differently? And whatever else it is that you'd like to say. As always, I greatly appreciate the YouTube, BookTube, AuthorTube, HorrorTube, fantasy community that we have going here online. And I want to encourage everyone to keep reading. I think it's important. And 2024 should be a great year of me getting to be more active on BookTube once again. After all, every day is a good day for a book talk or a book battle. Peace.